The Mayor's manifesto was very, very clear. It echoed, foretold a lot of what has already been said. We have a housing crisis, there's a need to deal with it. And one of the mechanisms which the Mayor proposed in his manifesto was to set up a vehicle called Homes for Londoners. We've just published a report which was brandished earlier, jointly with London First, on a blueprint for how that mayoral agency, mayoral vehicle for delivering housing might work. We agree, London First and Dentons, we absolutely agree that there needs to be a vehicle that is focused within the GLA on delivering housing. One minor bit of difference, and this has probably changed over the past couple of weeks, and this hasn't necessarily been agreed with London First. I've characterised it as Homes for London. The Mayor in his manifesto characterised it as Homes for Londoners. I think we need to be very careful of that distinction. This is about homes for London, to support London, the economy of London. It's not meant to be exclusive. It's not just for people who are presently within London. I came from Manchester. Would I have counted as somebody who would benefit from Homes for Londoners? No. This is about Homes for London, for the economy of London. We need to be very clear that it's inclusive, not exclusive. Now, why should we have an agency? Why should we have a vehicle that is focused on delivering housing? We had this debate as part of producing the report. We had a ginger group that held our toes to the fire, that had about 20, 25 people from around the business community in London, who quite rightly asked the question, well, why do we need another organisation at the GLA? The GLA can do this by itself. Why does it need to have a division within it? Why does it need to have a new agency within it that is concentrating on housing? Well, the answer is because it hasn't actually managed over the past decade to deliver the number of homes that are required. Because it needs a voice, and a focused voice, within the GLA that is able to ensure that housing is given the sort of weight that is, for example, given transport. Critically, it needs a counterweight, a bit of balance. Transport for London is a very powerful advocate within the GLA family for its interests. We need a similar sort of advocate within the GLA that operates to support the delivery of housing. So we saw, despite a few contrary views, a very clear need for a new agency to assist the GLA in meeting its targets on housing delivery. And then there was a question raised, well, as always is the case when you're setting up a new body or a new agency, and how does that work? Has it got the powers that it needs? And we went through, and you'll find in the report, an examination of the powers that the Mayor, the GLA family as a whole, has in relation to housing. They're extensive. There's a temptation, and lots of suggestions were made to actually ask for further powers. That's not necessary. Within the GLA family, within the powers that it already has, there is more than enough to start the work to deliver new housing. So let's not make our first plea is traditional on this sort of occasion for more powers, for more funds. That's not actually necessary. The powers are there, the funds in broad terms are there for the GLA to start delivering, provided it has got a focus, and a focus akin or comparable to Transport for London. What it does need though, and this is a phrase we have used a couple of times in the report, is rather more energy, rather more muscular approach, rather more confrontational and aggressive approach in some respects to the way in which housing is delivered. There will be battles. There will be battles internally within the GLA family. The battle we expect between TfL and Homes for London about how to direct resources, how to use capital. There will be battles with boroughs, and there will be battles with the private sector. And we should relish that, because it's only if we get that sort of battle, that disruptive behaviour, that we're likely to see the sort of changes in the numbers of homes delivered. So the first part of the report looks at setting up a new agency for housing in London. Start off with the existing Housing and Land Directorate. It has done a pretty good job of disposing of the land that the GLA already held. It could provide a seat, could provide a home for housing for London. It could also draw in, we think, quite a number of the people that are already within TfL who've got a whole host of expertise on things like CPO. I was talking to Jeremy Castle earlier, who says that there's 25 surveyors within Transport for London who are focused on delivering their sites out to the market. Those 25 surveyors, you could argue, might be better placed within Homes for London, where they are bent on delivering what the Mayor said in his manifesto was his first priority, housing in London, rather than receipts for Transport for London. So if it is set up, what should it be doing? There's a number of recommendations within the report about how the agency ought to work. And the first part of it, we make no apology for this, is an absolute and utter focus on trying to make sure that public land which is out there ready and available, capable of being developed, is brought to the market. It ought to create what we characterise as a land factory. We ought to be delivering a product, new land sites, out to the market so that it can be developed in a way which meets London's needs. And the first part of that I've already alluded to. I'll touch on three strands. And the first is working with Transport for London, against Transport for London, to ensure that its stock of land, very massive stock of land around London, is genuinely used for housing. At the moment, the focus of TfL has, to some extent, been quite rightly on generating receipts or generating future income streams. That possibly, if we're going to meet the Mayor's agenda, needs to be very slightly. It needs to be about delivering housing and delivering housing now. Now, the choice about waiting until a rather better capital receipt or better income flow comes in, it's about delivering housing now. And they have got a whole host of sites. 25 surveys is probably not enough to bring them forward. There'll be a need to enhance the capacity within the GLA family to ensure that those sites are brought to the market. So working with Transport for London on the Transport for London sites. The second side of work that we think Homes for London should take over is the work that is already being done with the London Land Commission. It has provided, or started to provide, a database of land that is held by the public sector in and around London. I'm not sure whether any of you have had the opportunity of looking at the database. It's relatively user-friendly. It's not perfect by any means, but it is the start of a doomsday book for London. We need to push that further by saying that it goes beyond just being a statement of record. A record is a great starting point, but we need, for all of those major sites, to look at ways in which they can genuinely be brought to the market, and that should be a real function of Homes for London. At the moment, the London Land Commission is virtual. It doesn't really have resources. It outsources to some very good surveying and planning practices to look at particular sites, but what it needs is an architecture, a secretariat that is genuinely bent on bringing those sites forward to the market. And not just bit by bit, looking, as I say in the third point, at making sure those sites are brought together. Some of that is going to be talking to other public sector bodies, encouraging them to bring sites together. Some of it's going to be assembling existing public sector holdings with private sector holdings to make sure that there is a genuinely developable site that is brought to the market. So using and building on the London Land Commission work, making it rather more muscular, and using CPO powers to a significantly greater extent. And it's worth just bearing in mind, and this is perhaps why Homes for London is needed, the extent to which the GLA has used its CPO powers. Once so far, in order to deliver anything around London on the housing side. That's not good enough. If you're a strategic body with broad, wide-ranging powers, then you ought to be exercising those powers in order to make sure that land is brought to the market. Now, that will work, I suspect, in many cases to encourage boroughs to do the same. The GLA, Homes for London, could offer a support, a resource to boroughs who wanted to bring forward land to the market and need CPO powers to exercise it. Could offer that power effectively to developers who are having trouble either bringing together public sector landowners or filling in the final bits of jigsaws that are needed to assemble a housing site. So being there as a resource to support, cajole, encourage, and, if necessary, bully and threaten those who are failing to bring land to the market, public sector and, in time, private sector. So three focuses, and there are a host of other elements and suggestions in the report about what Homes for London should be doing. But actually putting together the land, that is only the first step of the land factory. I think the GLA needs to, and Homes for London needs to wrap those sites in rather more certainty than is traditionally offered. It ought to be brought together. It then needs to be sold onto the market or brought to market in a way that offers the market a very clear indication of what it is that GLA, what London, what Homes for London, what the boroughs want to see on those sites. So the GLA, working with the boroughs, should be taking some real responsibility for saying, these are the sites that are coming forward, this is what we want to see on it, we have worked with the planning authorities, and we're clear that this is what they want to see on it. It will say this is the sort of density that we're able to support. It will say this is the sort of affordable housing mix that we're willing to support, and the sites will be pushed out to market on that basis. They will be valued on that basis, which means that we will have no, hopefully, future arguments about viability, because those requirements will have been priced in as part of the bidding process. So, and this isn't explicit in the report, but is implicit in it. If a site is sold on that basis, woe betide any private sector party comes back and says, actually, now we've discovered we can't afford it. Well, you bought it on the basis of those set requirements you're expected to deliver, and the report says, if you're unable to deliver, then don't expect to keep the site. There are going to have to be some sort of long stop clauses within agreements that say if you haven't started developing out within a particular time period, that there have to be some sanctions that apply. So London First, and I think this is wasn't a unanimous conclusion from the panel that we were talking to, accepts that there has to be some sort of teeth. If Homes for London is going to deliver sites, it has got to have the confidence that the private sector, when it takes up those sites, will genuinely deliver them. There are another whole host of other elements that we're expecting in time Homes for London to take up, because delivering land with a clear planning framework is only part of the equation. And so there's sections that look at the way in which transport infrastructure should be provided to make sure that housing is given more priority. There's debate at the moment about the future route, for example, of the Bakerloo line. There are discussions going on with Canary Wharf Group about possibly taking Bakerloo line extension up and through Canary Wharf. Great for business. Is that necessarily the best solution for delivering more homes for London? Possibly not. If you're asking and meeting the Mayor's manifesto commitment to more housing, maybe it doesn't get bent towards Canary Wharf, it gets bent, despite the possibility of contributions from Canary Wharf, in another direction that delivers more housing. Coordinating pan-London approach to affordable housing absolutely is going to have to take place. There will have to be far more coordination between the boroughs about the way in which affordable housing is going to be provided if we're going to get close to the 50% target that the Mayor has set for himself. And that is going to require far greater reliance, I think, on the housing associations with whom Homes for London is going to have a very close relationship. And one of the problems that was identified in the report is the relatively limited number of home builders. The housing associations have to some extent started to step into that role, but activities of people like London and Quadrant are setting a good example. But there needs to be a whole new generation of housing associations encouraged to come along to do the same. Financing and funding, I said at the outset that particularly in these times we shouldn't expect a great deal more on the financing and funding side. I know that there's discussions going on with the government about the housing package that will be available for London going forward. One of the shames of the Brexit debate outcome is that Sadiq had done some very good work appearing alongside David Cameron on the platform. I would make a guess that at least part of the deal was that we support you, get decent housing settlement. I suspect that debate will be rather more difficult with whoever now takes over, which is a crying shame. But there will have to be a clear case made, but not an exclusive case for the way for funding and financing tools being available to London to ensure that new homes are delivered. And critically, absolutely critically, so we recognise this in the report, skills and the skills gap, the availability of labour to build the number of homes that are required is an issue that the Mayor is going to have to address. But those points are all we see part of a longer term and probably more difficult solution. The first step for Homes for London should absolutely be about concentrating on public land, making sure it is packaged, comes to the market with a clear set of obligations that enables us to get far closer to the 50,000 homes a year or more that need to be delivered. So on that note, I just wanted to say thank you very much for being here at Dentons today. And James, over to you.